Hello and welcome. I'm Sue from Eat Veg. Today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Anita Johnston here from America to talk to us. So what she's going to be talking to us about is how we need to get to the root of our hunger. That it's not about food, that we actually need to understand what our spiritual and emotional hunger is in order to overcome an eating disorder. So Anita, would you like to talk about this today?
It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Even though it's probably one of the most misunderstood and difficult things to understand about eating disorders, because we deal with the world of paradox when we understand that eating disorders are not about food and fat, and they are about food and fat. And so the question is then, how do you maneuver through the paradox? And this is a question that has to be answered not simply by those who are struggling, or those who have loved ones that are struggling, or even professionals who treat people with eating disorders. It's the root of the matter when it comes to understanding eating disorders, this very paradox. We live in a very literal culture so that we pay attention to those things that we can see, those things that are visible, the eating disorder behaviors, or the number on the scale, or the food that we restrict, or the food that we binge on. And what happens, unfortunately, is that we fail to see the invisible forces that are driving the disordered eating behaviors. And so as a result, we don't even think there's anything else going on. Now, what are those invisible forces and how can we possibly see them? Well, I consider them things like emotions and intuitions. So how can we possibly get to a place where we can see that which is invisible? The way I do it is through the world of metaphor and the language of metaphor. And that's the language actually that we use in art, in our songs, in our poetry, in our stories, because that's the language that helps us get a glimpse of this world of forces that are just driving behaviors that we're wanting to stop. To get us there, imagine this. Imagine two tanks. We'll call one tank A and the other tank B. Now, tank A is the tank that we fill when we need physical nourishment, and we fill it with food. Tank B is the tank that we fill when we need emotional or spiritual nourishment. We fill it with things like attention, affection, appreciation, meditation, prayer, and so on. But what happens for many of us is we think there's only one tank. And so before we know it, tank A is full and overflowing, but we're still hungry. Or we don't want to get close to tank A because it seems like the bottomless pit. So what has to happen is this fundamental understanding that there's more than one kind of hunger. And in our culture, we don't have a lot of different words to describe those different kinds of hunger, so it's no wonder we get them confused. So the recovery process is one of learning how to tease the two tanks apart. So the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to rule out tank A. And the way you do this is by learning your proprioceptive cues, learning your hunger and satiety sensations as they exist in your body. They're actually physical sensations like a contraction or an expansion, a heaviness, a lightness, a roughness, a smoothness, something that you can feel in your body. Now, for many of us, though, we've been taught to disregard those sensations, so it takes a bit of practice of learning how to find those cues in your body so that you can understand if you're physically hungry or physically full. Now, let's just imagine that you've learned this, that you know totally how to tell when you're hungry and when you're full. You know exactly what those sensations feel like within your body. And so here you are, you're reaching for a piece of pizza, and you check in, not a hunger signal in sight, but you still want to eat that pizza. Well, guess what? Remember tank B? You have now just tumbled down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole and you've landed smack dab in tank B. Tank B is the world of metaphor, because in tank B, pizza's not pizza. food is not food. Once you've been able to rule out physical hunger, now you're dealing with metaphorical hunger. Now you are dealing with emotional hungers and spiritual hungers. And it's really important to understand that no amount of food will ever fill tank B. So the task then becomes one of naming those hungers. Hungers you may not even know are there. But guess what? The food will take you there. If you're reaching for that pizza and you know there's no physical hunger, then you know there's another kind of hunger. And it would behoove you to find out what that hunger is and develop the skill set to feed that hunger in order to free yourself from the battle with food.
So, what we really need to ask ourselves is, what are we really hungry for? Thank you, Anita, and it's goodbye from us today.